hey, how are you? Great to hear. Yeah, come in. Make yourself comfortable. Like a drink? Sure. There you go. Welcome to the Tech Lounge. Shall we begin? Hey, Kate, how are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Yeah. You know, we're coming into those dog days of summer.
Indeed.
We're getting some surprisingly warm weather into the it's the beginning of September, but it's a bit chilly in the evenings. You have to be careful. Yeah.
Well, I don't know. I find it refreshing.
Yeah, you know, you take what you can in sort of September to October, because in about 2 weeks' time, you'll be shivering your pants off. So,
Very true.
So welcome to the every other week format for Tech Lounge, when myself and Cate Lawrence will dig a little deeper into a topic that has interested us. We'll pick a topic each and spend a little bit of time discussing it and offering discussion, friendly debate, maybe a little bit of agreeable disagreeability on each other's topic. Before we begin, there's just a few people at the door who've got some things they want to tell you. Then we can get stuck in. If you'd rather not hear these interruptions, then please support the show. You can find details in the episode and show notes. So what's your topic this episode, Kate?
I'm looking at alternative proteins.
Mm-hmm. Well, what do you mean by that? Do you mean like beans and nuts and things, or do you mean...
No, actually.
Okay.
That's a very good question.
Yeah.
I mean, this is the $1 million issue when we talk about alternative proteins. In this instance, I'm talking about the manufacturing of cell-cultivated meats, fermentation for products like mycelium, which is a mushroom-like protein, and also insects, which is a kind of... I don't know, it's not something you hear a lot about in the West, unless it's kind of like a party trick food or something people recount eating on a visit to Asia.
Okay. And for me, I am going to dig into what is artificial intelligence, which might sound like a strange statement, but a lot of people get it wrong these days. So I kind of wanted an opportunity to have a little bit of a delve into history to explain what it kind of is, what it has been, and what we now call AI really is. So these are both big topics. So we're going to get a little deep, more like kind of the middle of the swimming pool, maybe.
Yeah.
So, who would like to go first? Should we flip a coin?
Sure. All right. I don't mind going first.
Okay, all right, fine. We won't flip a coin. So, Kate, these cell-cultivated meats, mycelium, fermentation, insects. How many of these have you eaten? How many have you eaten?
I've only eaten the insects and I've eaten mycelium.
Ah, okay.
The mycelium I ate in Estonia, a food tech company making mock meats there. And the insects I've had in Europe. I think I had them in Amsterdam from memory. A few other places, but also in Asia. But I have a question for you actually. As a lifelong vegetarian or very long-term vegetarian you are, when it comes to these things, would you eat, for example, insects? That's the question.
So my current wave of vegetarianism is because I just don't like the texture of meat. So I think I probably would eat things like mycelium and other funguses because I already do. A lot of much more mainstream meat replacement products are already like that. And corn, for example, has existed in the UK for a long time.
Yeah, exactly. Corn is exactly right.
Insects?
Not allowed in Europe, sadly.
Yeah. Well, I bet not allowed. They just don't have a distributor. I'm not sure. Who knows? I'm not actually sure.
No, it's not authorized. It's not been cleared.
Really? I mean, it's decades old.
I know.
Only like 30 years old, isn't it? Yeah.
I know. I'm not entirely sure why.
Okay.
But,
Insect? Not sure, because the texture is quite different. I do eat seafood. I'm one of these weird... That's why I don't call myself vegetarian. I say I just don't like meat.
I shouldn't call you vegetarian then.
No, because it's a different texture. And in honesty, I sort of feel like insects have a similar-ish texture to things like sardines and stuff like that, especially because, you know, they could be a little crunchy.
They must be big insects then. I was thinking of like grasshoppers, mealworms. They're two of the most common ones cleared for use.
But they're not very big,
in Europe,
are they? So
for consumption.
I think this is the thing.
What if they were ground into a powder, like a flour?
Oh, no. I'm saying I probably would eat them because I think the texture is different.
Yeah.
But I think the one I'm not interested in is the cell cultivated meat because to me, that would have the same issue with meat, really. I just don't actually like the chewiness of it.
So what about an example of a chicken product? And when we talk about a cell-cultivated meat, I'm going to use the term meat for convenience. We could be talking about a pork-type product or a chicken-type product also, of course. Often it's chicken. There is actually a company in Italy that started working on some very interesting tech and working together with a scientist from one of the universities in Italy where they could actually get cells from patting a chicken, patting the feathers, and use those in the...
What do you mean?
Correct.
Padding? What does padding the feathers mean?
Well, like a live chicken.
Yeah.
So you've got a chicken in your, I don't know, garden, whatever, your farm. You pat the chicken.
Oh, pat.
It transfers cells.
Pat the chicken. I think you said
that's what I said.
The chicken. Ah.
Pat.
that
the chicken.
even
pat
weirder.
The chicken. Yeah, and basically they were able to get cells that they could cultivate in a laboratory setting and then, create a product out of it. And when we talk about the end product, we're talking about a meat protein, which is probably texturally a bit like something you'd get in chicken nuggets, perhaps, something like that. We're not talking about like – a lot of people think – because I've done this – I've moderated on this topic a few times. A lot of people think we're talking about a chicken coming out the other end with like bones and stuff. Yeah, we're not.
No, just the end product that most people see, I suppose. Exactly.
Yeah. Well, that's right. If you eat sausages or burgers, like patties or nuggets, things like that, this is what you see mostly. In when we talk about the cell-cultivated stuff. Okay, the problem that the industry is set with a lot of problems, unfortunately. The first one is the regulations have been very slow. Currently, the only place you can legally purchase cell-cultivated meat is Singapore, and that's a chicken product. I can even tell you who the company is. 1 second, because I wrote it down. Oh, yeah. Upside Foods, Good Meat, they're the two main ones in the US who also sell their products in Singapore. However, to be very clear, we're not talking about very large sales here. We're often talking about more pilot sales, those kinds of things. There's been lots of partnerships where they get, a fancy restaurant to cook with the stuff and people try it. But, the fact that they've been able to make it possible. So let's take a step back. Yes, you can make the stuff. That's not the issue. The issue is, will people eat it? It's the cost of making it and the scale. And can you make it, in a large enough quantity to make an impact? And out of that, we've seen quite a strong opposition. In parts of the US, cell-cultivated meats are banned in particular states, also in parts of Europe. And what that has meant, for example, the Italian company I alluded to earlier, they've basically closed down because the legislation was introduced in Italy was such that they could risk not only fines but a jail sentence if they considered with their work. And when you consider this is, what a waste of R&D doing something that's really for the greater good. And it's funny because I get quite regularly emails from a lobby group in the US who are opposed to cell-cultivated meat. And they send me these little cartoons and they're basically like, the storylines are something like, do you want your meat to come from a factory? And they'll show like a, dark, scary grey factory or in a field. And they show the field with the flowers and the cows or what have you.
But of course, this is what already happens,
Exactly. The uncomfortable truth is a lot of farming these days is factory farming. It's farming done in cruelty, in very close quarters and all those sorts of things. It's not the great life luxury for the animals that we would like to think in a lot of instances.
And why do they send you these emails? I don't quite understand.
Because I've written about it.
Oh, so they're trying to, they're kind of almost protesting against you.
Yeah, basically.
And so the impression I get is that a lot of the main resistances to these substances is lobby groups, basically. Meat lobby, dairy lobby. We've had the same conversations around
I'm not entirely
milks
sure
as
about
well.
that, to be honest, because there have been a number of instances where the meat lobby groups, I think in Australia there's a couple, have actually, the meat companies have actually invested in alternative proteins, even things like veggie burger type stuff.
That makes sense, yeah.
But I mean, I think the other thing to look at this discussion is, you're trying to get a product out. People are spending a large amount of money. The R&D has been really quite impressive. For example, here in Europe, we've seen a number of different examples like Meatable, a couple of the Dutch companies.
They're all using that
Meatly
word. That's the thing, yeah.
Meatable and Meatly are the two kind of companies in the Netherlands that I think are actually kind of leading Europe for meat that humans can eat. I'll explain why I say that in a second. And actually, the reason they've done that is they actually created their own kind of lobby group and lobbied the Dutch government for consideration to be able to hold the first tastings.
And people who don't know, the Netherlands is a huge farming country. Like, it's a small country, but they farm a lot of food.
But basically, because what's been happening in this space, and this, to be very clear, this is not just your meat products. We have, when we get new foods, they're called novel food groups. And what's been happening is that companies are unable to produce their wares and to get approval, because obviously there's a whole multiple step thing you have to go through with the EU. Takes a long time. And a lot of companies are choosing to go for the US or Asia as their first markets because they've been waiting so long.
But is the FDA not any equally as strict, or?
I think they've already got their own products. They've already approved stuff already. Like in the US, it's legal to produce cell-cultivated meats, for example. There's a couple of companies there doing it. But again, they've only been sort of sample-type stuff as opposed to buying it at the supermarket. But, I mean, sorry. Go for it.
So just we've talked about the cell-cultivated we've talked about the cell-cultivated meats, and obviously there's R&D issues and there's a scale issue, and it's not necessarily that affordable at the moment. But let's talk about the insects, because I feel like a few years ago this was something that was everywhere, and it didn't really seem to grow beyond a novelty.
Insects is a really interesting one. I mean, I kind of, it's always been one on the back burner. And if you actually Google it, because at one time I thought I'd do let's see how many insect companies there are in Europe. There is a very, very large amount.
Oh, okay.
I think it was dozens and dozens. It was a massive amount of companies. I mean, these were lists that the industry had collated. I would have obviously had to go through every list and see which ones were still active, et cetera, et cetera. But to give you an example, you've got products like Y-Insect, which is from France. They were founded 2011. They've raised over 200 million in funding and created kind of a couple of – they've got a vertical farm, and they're also making the world's biggest insect farm, like a second farm, that aims to produce over 100,000 tonnes per year. Now, the issue is with them, and also Protix in the Netherlands, Innovafeed, which is also in France, AgriProtein in UK, none of them are actually producing the insects for human consumption.
Oh, okay.
They're usually going for – originally they were, but they all pivoted. And they pivoted to fertilizer, feeding fish, like in a in a large scale kind of situation, and a smaller scale, maybe as a supplementary product. But none of them have really been able to crack this commercial market where, I know, for example, here in Berlin, I can buy pet food that's got insects in it. We tried that with our old cat. She didn't like it. Oh. Everyone else I've spoken to said the same thing. Yeah. The animal didn't like it. You can also buy in the UK. The UK has produced Europe's first cell-cultivated pet food, which is a chicken-style cat food. So the stuff for the animals is already there, but they've never really got the traction with humans. And I think we've got this sort of situation now where if we look at alt protein in general, if we include things like soy and bean burgers and all this sort of stuff, there is a very saturated market. It is, which is good and bad, because it means, for example, if you are a vegan burger store. So you have a vegan burger shop where you can buy vegan burgers, vegan fries, et cetera, et cetera. You're competing now with Burger King or someone like that who also has veggie burgers, at least in Europe. And for a lot of people, that's the rub. So it's like, well, how do I stay competitive against that? And there's even been scenarios like I know that, what's that one in the veggie one, with the one we don't like?
The veggie one we don't like. You might need to be a bit more specific.
Vidang?
Oh, yeah. It's just it feels very bandwagony, not really out of passion for the topic.
Well, yeah, they're a chain. They're a vegan chain.
Yeah.
They're actually a burger chain, and introduced a beef burger recently.
Interesting. I mean, actually, one thing we noticed when we were back in Australia is like the vegan vegetarian trend there a few years ago seemed to have waned a little as well. And I do wonder if that a lot of it was unfortunately a trend that is, I don't know, maybe waning. Hard to say. I think that's getting into a slightly different topic. I would be really interested to hear more about this mycelium. Like anyone who watches, especially recent seasons of Star Trek, they're endlessly going on about flying through the mycelium network. And mycelium is one of these weird magical things that people mention in all sorts of odd contexts. So how does it relate? And it's actually real. How does it relate to food? Because it seems to be one of these wonder things that has popped up a lot recently.
Yeah, I mean, it's actually super interesting because the use cases are vast. I mean, we're talking about a fermented fungal product, if we can use those terms, that grows in a bioreactor.
So we've talked about cell cultivated meat and insects, but anyone who's watched any Star Trek episodes recently or read any news, mycelium keeps coming up a lot, not just in food, but in all sorts of places. It seems like one of these wonder substances. So what is it?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, mycelium is basically a fungi. It comes from fungal roots.
Mm-hmm.
And it's grown in a bioreactor. It's basically fed and fermented, and then it becomes a product that can be used in food, but also a bunch of other use cases. For example, sustainable industries, things like construction materials, packaging, those sort of things as well. So it's really like something that when you think about it, maybe we couldn't have imagined it even a decade or two ago as being, a new product that came out of biotech, basically.
Yeah. How does it differ from something like corn? I mean, it sounds like a lot like corn to me.
Yeah, it's pretty similar.
Okay. So has it got clearance in Europe or not?
Most of the companies haven't put it on the market yet,
okay.
Like released their product, because the challenge has always been cultivating at scale, because you need to get enough that you can grow enough to be able to have a product that you can put in the supermarkets, because, you've got to put so much effort around introducing something new to a supermarket and getting it in the store on the shelf, as we know. It's like any of these things, any retail businesses. If you're going with that sort of direct to consumer through a store, like B2B to C, it's quite difficult. And you only get really that one shot to impress the consumers.
Yeah.
So if you're going to put your weight behind a campaign, you need to make sure the product's ready to go,
Yeah. I sort of feel like the obvious question here is, with all of these, all of this is about replacing meat that people feel like they need.
Yeah.
That's a whole other conversation. There is an obsession with protein that's a little bit unneeded, but that's a different conversation. And with the argument that this is better for the environment, is it? With all of these, I really wonder if it is. Is a cell-grown cow or a mycelium beef substitute any better for the environment?
Yeah, it is actually. There's been quite a few use cases. For example, Meatable can transform a cultivated cell into a sausage in 4 days.
Okay.
And how long does it take to grow a cow?
I don't know. I mean, it's not about the length of time. I'm sure they use
this is 60 times faster than the time it takes for a farmer to rear a pig.
It's not about speed. It's about like water and stuff like that. Like I imagine these are pretty water intensive.
Well, I mean, an animal on a farm is pretty water intensive.
No, for sure. That's what I wonder. I wonder if there is a valid comparison.
I think there is.
Okay. And I guess the other one would be, obviously they're all too soon to say, but health. We've heard a lot of conversations recently around the problems of processed food, and this is all processed.
Yeah, this is an interesting point because there's, at the moment, for example, there's a very big kind of health campaign, pseudo-health, whatever you want to call it, about ultra-processed foods. And this is where, unfortunately, any type of non-meat protein, if you can use that expression, falls down for a lot of people.
Yeah.
There are a lot of people making products that really are very low in terms of the amount of ingredients, for example. But, there's such a fear of processed. The idea that something is processed, it's pumped full of water, it's pumped full of salt, and the makers are all very aware of this. That's not what they're going for at all.
Yeah.
And, it's the question has always been, who is this for? We know that people that are vegetarian already, for example, are going to probably eat the mycelium. They're probably not going to eat the insects per se or the cell-cultivated meats. They could people that are meat eaters traditionally, with the exception of when they go to events and they're all vegetarian, which I think is great, they're more likely to be resistant and to see it as a punishment, And so I think this will
Only
be
if you tell them.
Yeah, exactly. But this will be can we get a price point that's identical? For example, I think I've been told in the UK, the cost of, for example, veggie burgers is twice the price of beef burgers. Because the beef lobby group were able to drop the prices, However, it's getting interesting there because of the cost of living crisis. Now, most supermarkets, including here in Germany, Rewe and Penny and I think Edeka, they have a commitment to a certain percent. I think maybe it's not all, but most of their vegetarian stuff is cheaper than the meat alternatives or the dairy alternatives.
Yeah.
And that's how you create change,
Yeah. Yeah.
Because people are ultimately going to vote with their wallets, People are, a lot of people are doing hard and they're looking at, and if they're going to make an effort to get that, like that fake sausage, tofu sausage, as opposed to getting chickpeas where they have to cook the chickpeas or what have you, they're going to want it at a good price point.
It is convenient, I will say that. Like I have cut down a little bit on the kind of mock meat stuff I eat.
Yeah.
Because I'm a little bit worried about the processing, the tofu, the soy, etc., the impact on my body more than anything. But they are definitely the convenience. It's quick to cook them up and stuff. I don't know. I have no idea. I mean, everything has a problem, so where do you stop? Meat is also pumped full of chemicals and things, so who knows? All right, yeah. I mean, on the subject of things that are potentially, on the subject of things that maybe you do and don't need, I think this might be a good opportunity to move to our second topic. But before that, let's take a little break.
So, Chris, what do you want to talk about?
Well, so interestingly, we were talking about mock meat. Maybe that's the wrong word, but I'll just use that.
Yeah.
Alt protein is what you've put in the document. Actually, maybe I should say that. I mean, you could argue that could be nuts and beans and all sorts of things. But, it's one of these areas where we could argue, do we need it? A real plant-based diet would be plants, not mycelium and insects and cell-cultivated meats, et cetera, et cetera. I feel like another thing in recent history that we could and should and maybe are questioning, do we need it? Is it worth the impact it's having on us? Is artificial intelligence. And that's what I would like to talk about. I don't really want to get into, is it hype? Is it overhyped? Et cetera, et cetera. I feel like many people have spent many a column, centimeter, and podcast and video minute on discussing that. What I actually want to talk about is, what is it? Because, and the reason why I'm not saying AI and I'm intentionally saying artificial intelligence each time is, I think the two words there are important. A lot of what we are now using is technically not really what the traditional artificial intelligence community calls artificial intelligence. And secondly, that second word is the most important part. It's not actually really intelligent. So that's kind of what I wanted to dig into a little bit. Cate, now in the past sort of 6 months to a year, in this recent wave of these tools, what ones have you tried? Which of these new wave of artificial intelligence tools have you used?
Good question. I think I've used some of the transcribing services. I have used some of the generative AI search services, for example, Bard or Perplexity. I have used some of the art for image, developing images for pieces, things like that. I was thinking, yeah, they're probably the main ones. I mean, we have our own AI plugin at work that we use, which is basically helps with headlines so that the headlines comply with SEO, which is, and to be clear, we don't always use the headlines. Often it just gives us, a nice sequence of words that we can adjust to our own taste. But it gives you kind of some of those words that you're going to, it's kind of, we'll give you five headline suggestions and you might put them together and come up with one or something like that.
Yep. So I like this list you gave me because it's a very good illustration of what I want to talk about. I'd also like to ask you, in your mind, as a kind of casual, vaguely, I'd also like to ask you, in your mind, as a casual but reasonably tech-savvy user, prior to about a year ago, what kind of AI tools do you think you're using?
I was using Otter.
Okay.
I was originally using a transcribing service that came out of Cambridge. That one was quite hard to use. I would have been using things like Amazon that has their own AI. For example, when you're doing a search or when you're looking at, you're going to buy something and it will give you options, for example, on what you're looking for, those sorts of things. So some of those retail uses would be one. And I'm sure there'd be a few others as well.
Okay. Good. Now, see, it's interesting what you said there because there is a certain mindset to thinking what is an artificial intelligence tool, and they're not all equal, but they tend to be lumped in as being equal. And this is sort of where things become interesting. Now, I'm going to refer a little bit here to Wikipedia for a couple of different definitions because I want to sort of be very specific about things. We could argue whether Wikipedia is a good source or not, but it's just the least biased. So, artificial intelligence, in its broadest sense, is intelligence exhibited by machines, particularly computer systems. What is intelligence? Well, this is this is probably a even broader and more complicated question. But again, according to Wikipedia, it's exhibiting a capacity for abstraction, logic, understanding, self-awareness, learning, emotional knowledge, reasoning, planning, creativity, critical thinking, and problem solving. Now, we could definitely argue that most computer systems even could handle some of these. Problem solving, yes. Planning, yes. Logic, most definitely. Computers are basically logic devices. Learning, to a degree. The others, maybe not. I would argue computers are not very good at abstraction. They kind of have to be pointed, things have to be pointed out all the time. Self-awareness. Don't even really know what that means. But I don't think so. A computer is not at this current point really aware of its own existence apart from just saying it is.
Yeah.
Learning, sort of. Emotional knowledge, not really. Reasoning, kind of. Creativity, again, not really. Critical thinking, I don't think so. So if we could take all of these terms, this is where I start to argue that what a lot of people call artificial intelligence is not really very intelligent. And I think a lot of long-term practitioners of the field would also, and probably are, arguing the same. Because actually it's not new. The discipline begins around the late 1950s, actually. I mean, I was taught artificial intelligence units at university in the early 2000s by professors who learnt the subject in the 1970s. So it really is not new. Like many things in computing and technology, the concepts are not new. The scale and speed is what's new. And there are a couple of new things, which we'll come to in a minute. So a lot of people argue that a lot of these generative tools at the moment are basically just glorified autocompletes. And especially with text, that really is the case. With images and things like that, it's sort of something else. it's an autocomplete abstracted. It's like second guessing. The person is asking for this. I will do this. And then you kind of refine it and refine it and refine it. And I'm not really dismissing that these tools aren't technically incredible and are useful and whatever. That's probably a separate conversation. But is that intelligent? Cate, do you think something that you have to instruct what to do and frequently have to kind of correct and clarify with, is that intelligent to you or not? I don't know.
I mean, I don't know how much it's learning, because it's, as and also as the end user, if you can look at it as a relationship between you and the tech, it's completely reliant on your ability to phrase things a certain way and to expect to get something out of it that's accurate, however you define accurate, because we do know that it does hallucinate based on the data that it's using to make those decisions. So I don't think it's terribly intelligent. If we're looking at generative AI as the example, not so much. Maybe some of the other use cases may be more intelligent, like drug discovery.
These tools you use, and I want to break down them a little bit more in a moment. Do you think of them as intelligent, whatever that may mean to you? We can argue about the definitions of intelligence and are humans really any better, et cetera, also. But do these tools seem intelligent to you?
No, they seem efficient. And I think that, it's reliant on what information it's being fed. The tools are being, or the large language models are being fed, for example. And the fact that that's going to be inherently biased, because we know that most large language model data is from the US and English-speaking countries, for example.
Yep.
So that gives you a very different question and answer when you're looking for issues, or you're in another country and you're trying to find things. Is there that data sovereignty in your own country? Probably not, with some exceptions, I think when we look at things like maybe drug discovery, is that more effective than generative AI in terms of what it's able to achieve? Do we have a way of assessing that and to actually know definitively that the things it's giving us when someone is doing that kind of research are sound? I'm not sure. And I'm not sure is there an agreed upon criteria globally for those sorts of things? I guess
it's interesting some of the things you brought up, because I'd like to compare and contrast something like you said, like a transcription tool, which I don't think is intelligent at all, to a drug discovery.
Yeah,
I would also argue that's not intelligent either, but they are called the same thing, but they're doing quite different things.
Yeah,
a transcription tool, I would have to I think that's sort of natural language processing, it's computational linguistics, it's referring to a lot of, I recognize what this sound is, so it must be this, versus drug discovery, which is trained on some of the same information, but just does what a human could do at scale.
Yeah.
And you could argue that a lot of what it comes out with may be nonsense, but it can still spot patterns. It's pattern recognition at scale that a human could do, but never at the same speed. Mm-hmm. And then a human comes along and proves or disproves some of its patterns it discovered. I think this is with a lot of these tools, it's not things that humans couldn't do. We just can't do them at that speed. Because, I think this is where I find it interesting, because something like a transcription tool is actually working in a very different way from ChatGPT even. They're not necessarily the same things, but we call them all artificial intelligence. And I'm going to throw in a few terms here that I think are important, because they were kind of the words we used before, especially some of them. So knowledge representation, natural language processing, that's a big one. That is one that a lot of the tools we are now talking about were called before. Mm-hmm. And I'm always very pleased when people who actually know what they're talking about in this space will use the correct terms. Mm-hmm. Because a lot of tools we think are quote unquote intelligent are natural language processing and their recommendation systems. You mentioned something like Perplexity. That is actually really just a much fancier recommendation system.
Yeah, totally.
And again, if you look at this Wikipedia page, it's talking about Google search, YouTube algorithms, recommendation algorithms. These are recommendation systems. These are not new. They've existed for some time. Artificial intelligence in games, to react to a human player, this kind of thing. And there's even a quote here I can see at the end of this list. However many AI applications are not perceived as AI, a lot of cutting-edge AI has filtered into general applications, often without being called AI, because once something becomes useful enough and common enough, it's not labeled AI anymore. I don't know when that was written. I almost kind of feel like that's the opposite now.
So
in the anything that exhibits a vague level of intelligence is now called AI.
Yeah.
When previously we might have called it something else.
It's almost like any startup doing something where they're able to automate some tasks, which are often just collation type stuff, CRM type things, is we'll put AI in their name or their tagline or their, they're very early on in their marketing, let's just say, And I mean, when we look down to it, like a question for you, because you were talking about terminology, like what's the difference between AI and machine learning, for example?
So yes, there is, and I'm going to again refer to sources because I want to be as accurate as possible.
Yeah.
And effectively, machine learning is a subset of artificial intelligence.
Right.
And again, you're right here. I don't know why I didn't mention it earlier. Machine learning, natural language processing, recommendation algorithms were the terms we used to use to be more specific. And now we've kind of zoomed out and call everything the same. So machine learning is concerned with the development and study of statistical algorithms. It just looks for patterns, learns from data, and then generalizes without any kind of specific instructions. So, and it feeds into some other things like natural language processing, sentiment analysis of text, computer vision, this is a cat versus a human, speech recognition, tools like Alexa, Siri, et cetera, spam filtering, even some of the medical applications you mentioned. Whereas artificial intelligence, in the traditional sense, was machine learning plus other things. And now, we call a lot of different things the same. And I feel like we haven't really mentioned the whole generative side of things. And this is because the generative aspect is something that's a little new. A lot of these techniques were not completely new. They've existed for some time, again, at varying speeds. The principles existed. The technology didn't exist to support them, but we kind of knew what we wanted to do. We just needed machines that could do them. And they came. The precursor to a lot of tools we have now, things like TensorFlow. TensorFlow has almost been forgotten about, but it was the top before GPTs came along.
Interesting.
And what is a GPT? So a GPT is a combination of a few things. The G and the T are the important parts, and these were the changes. So generative is the first part. So the ability to create, not just work on what's there. And the transformer, the T. So when we talk about ChatGPT and things, it's always referring to this GPT. These three letters that have become so synonymous now, pre-trained. So it's actually much more common.
Pre-trained
transformers. Yeah. And they use large language models. Now let's again dig into what these terms mean a little bit. Let's start with large language models because it's the older concept. It's a model. What is a model? It's a model, a theoretical representation of a system.
Yeah.
And this is a more conceptual idea, but it's basically attempting to describe something. Be that fictional texts, be that the representation of information on Wikipedia, be that weather patterns, be that English language, et cetera, et cetera. A large one, well, it might surprise you, it's a large one. And again, these were not new concepts, but we didn't have the tools until relatively recently to be able to handle them at this scale. And of course, the more data, the better they can be. So this is why this came at a crucial moment too, because now we could handle more data. And the GPT is just a type of LLM, and it's relatively recent. It's actually from 2018, but was sort of forgotten about for a while until ChatGPT. OpenAI have actually existed for a while. They had GPT 1, 2, 3, and it's really with 3 that it kind of comes into the mainstream attention. And what it means is and you can go and read the paper that this comes from, and it is kind of interesting. A transformer, this is the key part, is an architecture initially developed by Google from a classic paper in 2017 called Attention is All You Need, that converts text to numerical representations called tokens, breaks it down. This is how computers work. And then sort of they are related to each other. I'm getting very deep into technicalities here, but they use vectors to map the relationships, basically. And again, vectors are nothing new. It's all these kind of concepts that not necessarily new, but they all kind of came to a critical mass of affordability, scale, speed, all at the same sort of time, basically. And the interesting thing is now, as I say, we kind of lump them all together, but they're all working in quite different ways. Yeah, I don't know. I think this is a topic, people have entire podcasts on this topic. Like, it's hard to really... Sorry, Aki was just coming in and out the door.
Okay.
People have entire podcasts on this topic. It's hard to really get into any deep level of detail in a
I guess
20-minute
it's
conversation.
also a bit like, if we sort of understand where it's come from, and I'm actually writing about a company that developed their LLM in, I think it was 2017, 2016.
Exactly. This is 2017, 18 is kind of when these things, these techniques and principles emerge, but no one really notices them outside of certain fields until a few years later.
Yeah, and they're applying it to a legal setting. But it's sort of a bit like, I think it's interesting in terms of a tech, because to a lot of people, this is, they hear these words like AI and machine learning, and it's very, before these tools came out, I remember I would go to events and all the people talking about AI were people with PhDs who were on stage.
Well, they still are.
Yeah, on stage with panelists. They were not users they were not end consumer users, if you want to use that term necessarily. Yeah. Maybe some were, of course, or they weren't people that were displaced by AI either. But now you've got these tools that are available free to consumers who've probably never had the opportunity to be that close and personal with this, somewhat in this form, nascent tech, And, for a lot of people, that's they like it because they can see it. They understand. They don't necessarily understand what's under the hood, but they understand what it can do. And, unfortunately, we know now that some of the things it can do are things that the original creators never thought it would do. Some of the less.
About that. I'm not sure how true that is.
The fake nudes and fake porn and all that sort of stuff. School kids doing all that. Like, it's really quite horrible.
The conversation over whether engineers really think through the repercussions of their technology is a very old one, and they generally don't. They tend to think in sort of focused,
compartmentalized
about how cool and technically amazing something is, without really thinking about how people are going to use it outside of people like them.
But it's a question of, like, as someone you're someone that's obviously interested in AI. Given that we've got this, for a lot of people, there's the easy wins, but then you've got this fairly utopian background of, a negative background, I should say, of the evils it can do as well. How do we stay, I guess, excited about this, in a period of saturation where, I think of it a little bit like early blockchain, where there were some very exciting possibilities. But there was a lot of crap, you know?
I think I'd say that to stay excited, I would actually say this conversation, sort of overblow this conversation, but I feel like actually it's an important aspect in remaining enthusiastic and pragmatic and balanced, is that the phrase, and now I'm going to go to the acronym, AI is overused, much like blockchain was and is.
Yeah, agree.
And when everything gets lumped together, it's very easy to be tired of it. So I'd actually argue that even looking through this Wikipedia page, and I'll put them in the show notes, of the history, the terminology, understanding the different divisions, even at top level, makes you kind of understand the different subsets and what they are doing and how they are interesting. And then you can kind of break down and segment out the bullshit from the interesting and understand what is going on behind the scenes. There's 101 startups now just using OpenAI's APIs to do things that aren't that interesting, but there's also people, yes, discovering cures for cancer, maybe at scale that was impossible. And, but I always feel like it's useful to be informed.
Yeah.
And I would like to hope that anyone listening to this show is probably informed anyway.
Yeah, I agree.
But yeah. And that's why I'd like to refer back to that list again that you said at the beginning here, transcription, image generation, et cetera, title suggestion. They're all very different technologies, actually. But they're all now called AI.
That's
and
true.
What it actually means is they are all, it's almost like saying, it's like saying a video game, a content management system, and something else is just programming. It kind of, by lumping them all into the same field, it's almost, you lose actually what makes it more interesting. And you almost kind of denigrate the term AI by lumping them all together as well, because it just becomes, it's just this crap thing for making shitty pictures, when actually it's not. That's just one bit, So,
yeah, exactly.
So yeah. I don't know. I just wanted to kind of talk a little bit about it because it's a term that has been around for some time.
Yeah.
And we overuse it now, whereas in the past we underused it maybe.
Yeah, interesting.
So, yeah.
All right.
Anyway, I think you probably talked far more informed than I did. Because,
No, I didn't think so.
Well, I'm not sure about that. But, Cate, thank you very much for joining me. You will be joining me regularly every 2 weeks.
Yes. I'll be here with bells on, picking a bunch of different topics I'm also going to do something a little bit different and pick some topics that maybe don't get as much public notice in terms of, I think that's the one advantage I've had working in tech. I can pick, to some extent, pick my own topics. So things that maybe don't get as much noise, but still have extremely interesting backgrounds and blah, blah, blah. And
when you're not wearing bells, where can people find you?
Well, you can find me at Tech.eu. That's where I write every day, pretty much every day, a bunch of articles and listicles and newsletters and announcements and anything that's happening in Europe or the UK or Ukraine or some of the related areas. I am also on Twitter, Cate_Lawrence, or I am also on Threads, Cate M. Lawrence. So you can find me there or good old LinkedIn.
Excellent. Thank you for joining me in the lounge today.
No problem.
Can I get you a drink, Cate?
Absolutely. Make mine a Negroni, please.
So that was it. That was our guest today. Thank you very much for joining me in the Tech Lounge. I have been Christian Schiller. If you want to know more about Tech Lounge, head on over to christianschiller.com or please tell your friends about us. It's quiet and cozy in here, but the more listeners, the merrier. You can find more at christianschiller.com/podcast or in the show notes or episode notes, wherever you found this podcast. Thank you very much for joining me, and you're most welcome next time.